You're listening to the Kaiju Apostle Podcast, a deep dive into Toho's rich history of monster films and discovering what lies beneath the surface. Whether you're a hardcore or casual fan, or somewhere in between, if you've ever thought there must be something more to these movies than people in rubber suits, then this show is for you. Thanks again for tuning in to this episode of the Kaiju Apostle Podcast. My name is David.
And I'm Chris.
And we do have a special guest with us tonight. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
I am Benjamin Chaffins. For those that know me on Twitter, I am the Big Bad Ben 90.
You can tell it's not Henry because he didn't cut us off to do his intro.
Hello and welcome. Yeah. No, we love you, Henry. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. If you don't mind, just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself for those who may not know who you are.
Well, thank you for having me, first off. For those curious, I have interviewed a ton of people on the Godzilla series. My first interview was with Yoko Higuchi on Shin Godzilla. I write for Godzilla movies and sci-fi.com. One of my recent interviews was with Norman England, and now I've got 8 more lined up to the side.
Wow.
Which, to clarify, Norman England is not Freddy Krueger. Someone told me that when I mentioned that name, and they're like, "Oh, Freddy Krueger, that's awesome." I'm like, not quite. I think that's Robert Englund, and it's like Englund, so it's like England, I think. I don't know. Well, someone's going to correct me on that. But yeah, so you've got a few interviews coming up, and obviously don't want to spoil them, but I know you've been sharing a few, and I'm really excited to see what comes of that, because I think that's something that we're all kind of lacking right now, is there's no content coming out for these movies, right? So like this gives us something else to be like, hey, these are these films that we love, what really happened, and having people who are involved. No one else is doing that, so I'm really excited to see these interviews come down the pipeline.
Can I ask a question that we didn't discuss before we started recording about these interviews?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to do it anyway. Like briefly, like without getting into too many details about movies themselves, unless you need to, but like, how does knowing the behind the scenes impact the way you watch the movies now?
That's a good question, because when you look at the behind the scenes work, you realize the craftsmanship that goes into them, and it doesn't really affect the overall quality of the film, because as long as everything is executed the way it should be, you're going to have a solid film in front of your eyes.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. I think sometimes with some creatives on like Twitter with like Star Wars, I've tried to avoid that, because sometimes Twitter personas and the work they produce can, they can stand at odds. So it's good to know with Godzilla that getting into the behind the scenes doesn't affect too badly.
Are you referring to all the interviews with like J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio here recently?
Well, I mean, if Abrams was actually doing the interview, but yeah,
you know what I
essentially,
mean.
Yeah.
No, I'm the same way. I think it's something where there is too much, but I think if it's done right, like the interview you did with Norman, right? I remember reading that and just like, it was nice because you got to see a little bit of the good and the bad behind the scenes. Like he was very honest without being explicit about what happened. So I think for me, I have a deeper appreciation for what actually happened, even if my view of the films didn't change, just because you understand everything that went into it. Right.
Exactly.
So, but no, Ben, we're excited to have you. I know when we talked, a few months ago, about having you on, we were running through a few ideas of which movie, and you immediately were, I think it was really like Shin and then Mothra vs. Godzilla were your two main ones, and obviously this lined up really well. We'll see if we even get to Shin Godzilla if Chris isn't burnt out by that point.
Hey, what was that? 2000, 1999? When was that one?
2019. 2016, excuse me.
Oh, okay. So we'll have like Godzilla 98, obviously, then the 14 movie, and then that one, is what you're saying?
Yeah, there's going to be a few. Yeah, I'm thinking, where did 2019 come from? All right. Anyway, before I lose my credibility here. So before we jump into the movie, I just wanted to share something really quick. So part of doing the social media side of things is Chris has graciously allowed me to kind of steer the ship, so to speak, with interactions and stuff like that. Because I think we've kind of realized with a lot of the comments coming in, Chris, half of the stuff you messaged me and you're like, I have no idea what they just said. I think it's good, right?
That, or I make a meme out of it and then I have to look up spoilers to make the meme. But
yeah,
the meme is worth it.
Oh, dude, I'm so excited to share that one here in a few months. It's so good. The reason I bring that up is because I did write a article here recently within the past week, and it's on our website, thekaijuapostle.com. But it's Confessions of a Reformed Gatekeeper. And really my goal was to kind of hone into how I used to view Christianity as well, right? And how I could be very dogmatic with my beliefs and the way that I shared that. And it's not even that my beliefs were necessarily wrong. It's just I had to be humbled and realize the way that I was sharing them wasn't necessarily helpful. But the reason I bring that up is because we did have a really good comment, and I'm not going to be able to read all of it, but it's from Luke. He does a podcast called the Earth Destruction Directive. But he's talking about how, when he was in high school, he got into the fandom because for a while he didn't even know if fandom was a thing, right?
The blessed days.
I mean, that's even for myself. When, the 2014 movie came out, I was like, I knew other people liked Godzilla. I just had no idea fandom was a thing. So he says, for many years, even after he entered the fandom, he was teased and ridiculed for liking, kaiju and tokusatsu, even by fans of people who liked anime and Transformers and so forth, right? Which is strange. Like, we all like this nerdy crap, but we're making fun of each other. So at the end, he's like, my governing attitude for fandom is to do my best to have respectfully questioning attitude. If someone likes a film I don't, I want to ask why. What do they take from the film or show or comic or whatever that I don't? Same thing if they dislike something I like. What didn't work for them? Not going to say I always succeed, but I do try. Ultimately, like you say, everyone starts somewhere, and not everyone gets to the same destination. Maybe your first exposure was Godzilla vs. Megalon on a late night movie show, and you adore that entry above all others. I've never met that proverbial person, but if I do, I'd really like to hear their thoughts and have a discussion, which I did have someone message me and tell them that is how they started on the film, so they do exist. But that was just encouraging to me because that's our goal, right? Is, none of us start out with our favorite film being All Monsters Attack or, these kind of the films that we've had to grow to learn how to appreciate. So I think, that's kind of been a goal of ours, is going back to some of these films, like even Godzilla Raids Again, right? When we did the podcast, I didn't like that one. And then we came into it and I have a deeper appreciation for it now. Now, Varan, that one I'll probably never watch it again, right? But I had to go through that myself. And I think, Chris, you could probably agree with me on that.
Yeah, well, it does make me laugh that the Varan is the one. You're listening to that one. Thank you all for listening to that one. Just go listen to Godzilla Raids Again. There's a lot of prime Chris content y'all missed out on.
No, I just think, again, that's kind of our goal, is not only visiting these films that we all love, but just creating that conversation of like, we all are here for the same reason. So yeah, let's get into why everyone's listening. We are discussing the 1964 film Mothra vs. Godzilla. The unique thing, obviously, being is there's 2 Godzilla films released this year, which was not always the case. And they both are freaking good, which surprising, right? You get 2 films in 1 year, and it's actually good content. So plot summary for those of you who may be a little rusty on this film. So, when a typhoon strips a giant egg away from its home, a group of fishermen who have been down on their luck think they've struck gold. When our heroes investigate this phenomenon, a local typhoon and tycoon, I just realized that's funny, announces he's purchased the egg, and soon plans are made to build an amusement park around it. However, it's revealed this egg is actually Mothra's, and the Shobijin from 1961's film have come to Japan to get it back. Unfortunately, the business tycoon and his financial backer aren't having it, so despite our hero's finest attempts, the Shobijin return to Infant Island empty-handed, and with an ominous warning about what will happen if the egg doesn't return before it hatches. Before that happens, though, another threat rears its head. Godzilla reemerges after his fight with King Kong and ravages Japan once more. Now the race is on. Will our heroes be able to convince the Infant Island natives to help before Godzilla reaches the egg, or will humanity finally meet its end? So, getting into the staff here, we have our regulars. Directing is by Ishiro Honda. Screenplay is by Shinichi Sekizawa. Producer Tomoyuki Tanaka. Music Akira Ifukube. And special effects by Eiji Tsuburaya. Now, the cast is Akira Takarada comes back in a leading role as Ichiro Sakai as a newspaper reporter. Yuriko Hoshi is Junko Nakanishi. She's also works for the newspaper as the photographer. We have Hiroshi Koizumi as Professor Shunsuke Miura. And then we have Yu Fujiki as Jiro Nakamura. He's also a newspaper reporter. And then we have the Peanuts back as the Shobijin. Yoshibumi Tajima is going to be Kumiyama. He's the business tycoon, the owner of Happy Enterprises. And Kenji Sahara is Jiro Torahata. And Jun Tazaki is Arota. He is the editor of the newspaper. So before we get into the context and trivia, Chris, this is always my favorite part. What were your thoughts before getting into the film?
Well, I think before getting into it, this is when we talk about our movies about the monsters or about the monster fights or the humans. I mean, this one on the title seemed like it was going to be an entirely monster fight centric movie. So I was a little nervous. I knew it was your favorite, but it still made me a little nervous seeing the title like that. But I thought it was pretty, actually getting into the film itself. I was really interested because the plot reminded me of like King Kong, or even like, I know this was 30 years later, but The Lost World. But I appreciated the fact that instead of like King Kong already being alive or the T-Rex already being like an adult, it starts with the egg. So it's like there's not the immediate threat. There's just the almost prophetic threat. And how do you react? Like, it'd be interesting to compare like a T-Rex seems like an immediate, like, oh, that's going to eat me right this second, compared to an egg, which is it's almost easy to sympathize with the businessmen who don't want to bring the egg back, because it's like, it's just an egg. I don't see what the danger is. Yeah. They didn't experience Mothra the same way. So I thought it was an interesting little dynamic there. And what would they have to believe about the girls saying, oh, it's going to hatch into something terrible? Except for, I mean, the 17 kaiju that have already attacked Tokyo at this rate. But
yeah. And that is something that this is probably the first film where we actually see that it's connected to a previous film. I mean, there are very direct ties to the solo Mothra film from '61. How about you, Ben? I mean, this is a film that you obviously have a lot of, trying to think of the right word. You feel very fondly about this film. You've told me that more than once. So what is it about this film that made you want to be on this episode?
Well, to be honest, as a kid, growing up in childhood, it wasn't really a favorite of mine then. But as I have grown older and have come to understand more about the film, I've come to appreciate it more. And I think the thing that really stands out is just the different messages that the movie offers. Like the Brotherhood of Men, for example, that's talked about in the film. that's something that's been seamlessly shot to hell over the years.
Yeah.
And pardon my French, but uh, when you look at the messages, there's capitalism, there's, the brotherhood of men. You come to appreciate that more because it impacts a little bit more on your life.
Mm. Yeah, and it is a film where you're right. The idea of this unity, I feel like as Honda distances himself from these films, you don't see it nearly as much, right?
Mm-hmm.
Granted, in this film, we have more of a caricature with the antagonist, so to speak. But with later films, as we'll see, it's almost like the bad guys are so outlandish that you're just like, okay, that can't be a real thing. Whereas in this film, yeah, they are a bit, out there, but they're like very viable threats, so to speak, and the whole message that he has to say actually has something to say.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is probably the one thing with and Chris will see this here soon with the Fukuda films is like I love them, but I mean you really have to dig deep sometimes to get substance out of them compared to what we're looking at here today. So just a little trivia, because kind of what actually my first note here is just right what you're talking about, Ben. So what a lot of people may not know, and I didn't know this until I really started diving more into Honda's biography, is that Honda actually worked on all the scripts that for the films that he directed. Right, he wasn't just a director; he was getting in the nitty gritty, so to speak. So that whole appeal to the brotherhood of humanity, like that wasn't present in Sekizawa's original screenplay. That was something Honda actually would add in along with Toru Hata, right? So that idea of having the financial backer wasn't something that Sekizawa had thrown in as well, which was interesting, right? Because Sekizawa always, he seems to have a lot to say about capitalism, but then this shadowy figure, so to speak, was Honda's idea. So yeah, it would have been really interesting to me to see this film without that appeal to unity, which obviously we'll discuss later.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially in light of just having done Etrigan in our previous episode. Mm-hmm. There's some fertile discussions to come out of that. I am curious, though, what the movie would have been without some of these themes, without Honda's additions, just because that feels like that's a lot of the core of it. So I would be really curious what a stripped down edition would look like.
Yeah,
but
I think part of that problem, and I know, so Nathan Marchand at the Monster Island Film Vault, he has a really good YouTube video panel that he did at G-Fest last year about getting into Sekizawa and Kimura's screenplays. And I think that's just something where me personally, I've had to realize that even with like Gojira, right? I mean, yes, Honda had a lot to do there, but like he wasn't the only person involved. And a lot of times when we have these discussions, we can be kind of reductionist with how we're analyzing this, right? We just talk about Honda, which, yeah, he's a huge part of it, but he's not the only one involved. And the screenwriters are generally the ones that unfortunately are ignored unless the screenplay sucks. Then, of course, that's when you kind of get drawn out a little bit more, as we've seen with critiques about The Rise of Skywalker, right? It's, of course, it would have been, if the film was good, no one would be asking, well, okay, let me put it this way. It's not that the film's not good. I don't want to say that. But if the film was universally praised more, we wouldn't be seeing all these questions being asked to Chris Terrio, I don't think.
I don't know, because Endgame had a lot of that too. But I don't know if that's the hill we need to die on right this second. You can message me on Twitter about that. But I think what was it, Henry? And I don't remember if it made it into the final cut of our episode. But when we talk about these being a full cast, like a full team production, thinking about the design of the Godzilla suit being like a burn victim's skin.
That was Henry, yeah.
Yeah. Like it is, I mean, it's more than just one person telling a story. And I think that's why I really appreciated that you do the entire cast that you do, because we may like colloquially speak about one person, but it's good to acknowledge all of these people who come into it. And I think, with your interviews, you're seeing that same thing, seeing the way that people that we may not think right away influence the story can have that same influence. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
So just a few little asides, because like I said, I like we're talking about all this stuff that makes the film, right? So initially, Sekizawa actually had, and this is from the next few points are from Honda's biography. Sekizawa had Godzilla going back to Rilisica before going to Japan, so they were going to incorporate that element from the solo film. Not sure why it got nixed. Probably just needed to cut down, right? So at this point, we're also starting to see that the films are becoming a little bit more family friendly. Honda's quoted as saying, now that movies are being overtaken more and more by TV, Toho is targeting kids, not just adults. So we have to make something that all ages will find interesting. But in order to not patronize viewers and dumb things down, he does clarify that kids are more mature than we think. So this kind of makes me think that when people talk about these films being kid friendly, but then they're like, well, why would you have, I mean, there's times where like with this film, I had to fast forward through the part where, Torihata shoots, Kumayama, right? I'm like, I don't want my 4-year-old necessarily watching that.
Yeah.
And I have to do that with some of these films. But then you think, kids programming back then is a lot different than how we see it now, because even with like Ultraman, I'm like, ooh, that was a bit more intense than I was expecting.
Well, and I think what we don't realize is that kids TV these days does focus on like some pretty intense themes and topics still. I think we have like this idea where everything's SpongeBob, but it's not really a fair.
But even SpongeBob though, like I remember the first time I realized how many sexual innuendos they slipped in there. Like I think it was the episode with the I'm like, oh my God.
Sexual innuendos were one thing. I guess I'm looking at like Steven Universe as it deals with trauma and family and destiny.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, I just don't know if SpongeBob's necessarily the best example for like, I would say like maybe like Tumbleleaf, right? I just watched that with my son and I'm like, this is actually a really cute show. Like there's nothing, it's so innocent. And I'm like, you don't find that very often at all.
No, you really don't.
And then the last little bit here. So this was actually really funny to me. So this film marks one of the only conflicts between Honda and Ifukube. So they're on the record of working really well together. But apparently there was a scene that Honda wanted music, but Ifukube said, no, it's going to be fine without it. So Honda agreed, right? Ifukube didn't write anything. Well, when the film went around for staff screenings, Ifukube saw Honda had added music anyway. So Ifukube said, so I glared very hard at Honda-san, and he just shrugged his shoulders kind of innocently and said, sorry, very softly. And that was it. But
what a tip.
The rest of it, yeah. So the rest of it is just like, I guess Honda would say that, oh, I don't know much about music, but then he would come in and like have all of these like very helpful criticisms and feedback into the music process. And I think that's kind of been my takeaway in reading this biography is like, not that Honda is a perfect person by any means, but people are very eager to praise him for the kind of person he was and the kind of father he was too. That was very encouraging to read. And even in my own life of like, I don't know, it was refreshing. So yeah, we've got a couple, concepts we really want to dive into, but Ben, you were telling me that one of the things that you really love about this film, and I mean, kind of alluded to this with the interviews, knowing what's going behind the scenes and such, but you were saying that the special effects were something that really stood out to you. And you said that you had kind of done some research on that. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, we'd all love to hear that.
Just certain aspects of the movie that really stand out are the adult Mothra's battle with Godzilla, because a lot of people may know this and may not know this, but it was a combination of puppetry, suits, the Mothra prop, and stop motion all put together.
It doesn't seem like it seems pretty seamless if they were really using that many different mediums. Maybe not perfect, but I didn't pick up on that.
Well, given the time and the budget, you know, they worked with the resources that they had. And to be fair, IG Subaraya's miniature work here has withstood the test of time.
Oh, yeah.
That was actually a comment I had left where when Godzilla makes landfall, that miniature work is still some of the best miniature work I've seen in any of these films.
Yes.
So when you preface within those comments, you know, may know, may not know, you can guarantee for all of those that I do not know. So if you have any other of those fun tidbits, you can at least, do you have any to share that I for sure don't know?
Well, the destruction of the incubator that was holding Mothra's egg, a lot of people may not realize this either, but when it comes to Godzilla using the tail whack to smash the incubator, they actually had the guy holding a tail prop to smash into the incubator. The guy's filmed off screen, but you just see that his tail smack into it. That was another effect I thought was captured really well.
Okay, that's pretty funny.
So I have a question. Was there something that happened to like loosen up Godzilla's jowls? Was that on purpose? Or like was that something that happened and they just never fixed it? Like it's not a bad effect, but I've wondered that for the longest time.
I think it was something that they had decided just to go ahead and run with. Like they didn't have the time to fix it. They just went ahead and went along with it.
Yeah, it makes it unique. I like it, but I was just like, I wonder if like something happened. Cause I mean, you have that scene where very clearly he trips, right? And then he starts clawing on the building there, which I mean, part of me is like, I don't know how intentional that was. But I will say with the puppetry, it was a little bit more pronounced for me this time around because there's that scene where he gets his tail stuck in the tower and then the tower falls on him and you have this split second of like Godzilla like screaming and you have this face and it's like almost like they took a split second of the puppetry work at the end and spliced it in there, which I thought was strange. But that's when it like really reaffirmed me. I'm like, wait, that face, and I realized it was a different design. I was like, that's got to be a puppet.
Yes, and it was.
Wow, I didn't pick up on that at all.
Well, the scene, from my understanding, with Hiro Nakajima inside the Godzilla suit when he trips into the castle, I think what happened with that was he was getting to the point of exhaustion, and it actually tripped and fell into that. And instead of that thing crumbling the way Subaraya and his team had crafted it, it didn't break. So they had a extra crewman filmed in behind the castle to help destroy it when he actually goes and claws it down.
That's awesome.
Can I just point out that I know you already think I think this, but when you said jowls, I of course heard bowels. So I was like, oh no, why are we talking about loosening his bowels? Did I miss a scene?
You know, I wasn't thinking that, but I will say when I was watching it last night, it was me and Jasper and my wife was sitting there too. The part where Mothra, the larva, comes out, she's like, oh, that's disgusting. I'm like, babe, we've had a kid. That's normal looking.
I can guarantee I've seen grosser in real life.
Yeah, and she's like, yeah, you got a good point. And it was like, you got to appreciate that oaky afterbirth, right?
Oh, you really don't.
Oh, Michael Scott. Okay. So before we start talking about frying up placentas, so getting
Once again
into
there.
being a dad has ruined me. That's for sure. Okay. So the film itself, it's interesting because in David, and you're gonna correct me, Ben. So is it Callet or Colette?
Collat.
Colette. And that's what I thought. So, which we did draw the winners for that. Ironically, the two winners were Eli and Elijah. I was like, that's really funny. Reading David Collat's book, he had mentioned, off the cuff pretty much that like this is considered like the best Godzilla film. And by consensus, right? And I think before we get into the themes, I really do want to discuss the quality of this film because it's so much different than what we've had previously so far. And I say that because this to me is pinnacle Godzilla. So Gojira, hands down, is the best film, and it will always be the best film in regards to execution, quality, overall message, the score. I get that. But this film, I feel like, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts, it captures the severity of what humanity can do, but it also gives us the monster fights that we all like, right? I mean, that's the thing that I've realized is no matter whether you think humans are important or not, we're here because we do like the monster fights. And the fact that we do actually get a very comedic film without it feeling super slapsticky, right? So you take this deep message, but then you flavor it with good Japanese humor and you get some fun action. And to me, I feel like this is like pinnacle Honda Sekizawa, just Showa era film. And that's, I like, in a way I can agree with him where I don't know if it's necessarily best film objectively, but I think out of every film that we're going to review, this is still probably number one for me. So I know, Chris, you don't have a lot of reference on it, but maybe you could speak to what you think in comparison to the other films after Ben shares his thoughts.
Sure.
Well, it's in my top 5. That much I will say. For the longest time, I never did consider it to be that great of a film. But that was from my childhood to about my teenage years. When I went to revisit the film, like I said earlier, I discovered the meanings behind it, what it offered, and just how good of a classic it really turned out to be. My overall thoughts on it, it's a beautifully crafted film. And you had Subarai and his craftsmen firing on all cylinders. You had Ifukube's outstanding score for this film. And then, of course, the storytelling from Ishiro Honda.
Yeah, not David has given me grief about this before. I'm not a huge score guy, but yeah, this one, it definitely starts to stand out a little bit. So before I get into my thoughts, though, you said like as a child, you thought as a child, but now as an adult, you think like an adult, as Paul says. Did you go into this movie thinking were you just like, you just turned it on one night and you suddenly liked it more? Did you have something that happened in your life that you're like, I should revisit this, give it a different chance?
Well, when I first saw the film, it was broadcasted on TNT's Monster Vision marathon. That was many years ago. But as a kid, I couldn't stand the fact that here are these two caterpillars and they defeat, everyone's favorite monster, Godzilla. That's the one thing that irritated me. And I never did care for the movie. But it was up until 2014 with the legendary Godzilla film coming out. I decided, okay, let me just go back and revisit these. And I was glad I did, because when you look at them now in your adulthood, you start to see the bigger picture.
I love that it was like the wrong monster won the fight. Because like, if I were a kid and like saw a movie from 1964, I would have just been like, oh, this is boring or it looks silly. I wouldn't have been like, oh man, the wrong person won the fight. That's still kind of a very like film critical thought to have to not like it the first time. That's funny. But yeah, I think in terms of objective quality, this is the best one we've had, and it'll probably stay on top until we get to 1998 or maybe before in 68. Is that when Son of Godzilla comes out?
There we go.
Yes. And but no, overall I think what I really appreciate this one is, you know, you had alluded to this, but as Hannah Montana once said, this movie gives us the best of both worlds. We get the monster fights, we get the human story. And what I really liked about this one, and you know, I really go for the really easy, the low-hanging fruit when it comes to my film criticism. But like I kind of liken this one to Black Panther, in that like Black Panther is a contextual story, but it also like gets into some universal concepts. And I really like how this one has a more like, it's still grounded in Japanese history, Japanese culture. There's still the whole context of the Godzilla series behind it. But now you get into like, talked about the brotherhood of mankind, talk about nature versus capitalism. This is, we're starting to see some of those themes bubble up, where just as like Etrigan was very like timely when we watched it again 2 weeks ago, this one still seems very timely as well, in terms of like, how do we talk about the way that capitalism and environmentalism meet? What kind of dangers do we face when we go overboard with capitalist ventures? But it's not told from like a universal, I mean, it's still grounded, so we still have people to hang on to. And like you had pointed out, we don't have this like outlandish, he's not terribly outlandish, because in a world where certain people have Twitter accounts and also have very high government offices, we've started to see outlandish like cartoon characters become reality. And so this guy doesn't feel too far out. But just as like when you watch Black Panther, it's hard for, at least for me as a white middle class suburbanite, to not think that Killmonger might have had a point somewhere in there. There's a little bit of sympathy to be had with the antagonist here, in terms of like rebuilding Japanese economics, like rebuilding tourism, maybe world relations to an extent. I wouldn't say that I'm like, oh, totally, he's right. But this is a good one to deal with that they might have a point. So,
see, there's two things I'm going to disagree with you on. Is one, because I know someone's going to try to correct us or stop listening. It was actually 1967 for Son of Godzilla. I had to check. I was like, wait a minute, Chris got a date right? I was like, nope, he did not. So, see, and I'm, to a certain degree, I would want to agree with you on there. And I think this is a good jump for us to get into the economic side of thing, because that's actually where I want to talk about, is less about capitalism, right? Because I'm not an economics major at all. So when I discuss capitalism, I realize I'm using a caricature to a certain degree. But I think you're giving our antagonists way too much credibility, because they really didn't have any redeeming factors at all.
Well,
I think one of the only positive things you could say is that they were trying to, in a way, maybe potentially, it's still no, they weren't even helping the fishing community, right? So to give a little context, because you're right, that context is super huge here, and this part here is going to be really indebted to David Collat's research. So in the 60s, we see a huge economic boom for Japan, especially after the war, and obviously bombs being dropped on two major cities. Like, you know, I would assume that would probably do something to your society and your economy. So when Prime Minister Ikeda was instituted in 1960, he, and I quote from Collat, boldly announced he was going to see the incomes of the Japanese people double by the end of the decade. That ended up happening in roughly 8 years, to the extent that the Japanese economy was only second to the United States. But as we saw in Matango, progress can be a double-edged sword. And the economic boom came with the struggle of losing those long-held traditions and identities, right? So
Sure.
Kalat rightly points out that the ritualized property destruction that characterizes Japanese monster movies obsesses over the economic miracle in reverse. So all of this wealth and prosperity created so suddenly can disappear just as fast. So to me, I don't even see that necessarily being capitalism, right? Because even if someone wants to advocate for more of a socialist economic structure, which I think has its merits, there is still going to be exploitation.
Mhm.
And that ultimately, I think, is the issue here, right? It's not that capitalism is necessarily a evil construct. I have my issues with it. Rather, it's that right off the get go, the fishing community, they've been struggling, right?
Mhm.
That's what I said in the synopsis is they've been down on their luck. All of a sudden this huge egg comes out of nowhere and they're like, hey, like we should get it because our fishing's been bad. This is going to get us out of this hole. But Kumayama, he's not necessarily wealthy compared to Torohata. He not only exploits that egg for his own gain, but he takes advantage of that fishing community, right? We see that where, they need that money that they were promised to survive because they're not getting their fishing. The fishing isn't just food, it's their livelihood, it's all their jobs. They're relying on Kumayama to pay. They have rent that he's agreed to. They've, it was 8 yen, for an egg, and it was like what, however many, so it ended up being 1 million or so yen that they were waiting on. But Kumiyama doesn't care. He's concerned about how much money he can make. And we even see this wealth discrepancy between Kumiyama and Torihata, where Kumiyama is like, well, we could probably make 50 million yen off of this, whereas Torihata is like, no, we're going to make 1 billion, right? So there we start seeing that there's a discrepancy even within the elite. Is you have people that have money, they're wealthy, but they still want more, and then you have someone who has more money than anyone could ever dream of. Yet, what happens when the Shobijin show up and they think someone broke in? He looks outside, but the first place he checks after that is to make sure all of his money's there.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the kind of person he is, where he will exploit Kumiyama to make more money. He's gonna make Kumiyama take out a loan to just do all of this. So the exploiter is now being exploited. So it's this trickle down. It's less about the capitalism and more about the fact that we as humans take advantage of each other for our own gain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to walk back a little bit, but I guess what it comes down to is like, well, and maybe this is I could use myself as a good case study because I think we do see this kind of stuff happen so often that
Mhm.
I'm so used to it that I would see this as something that's good and not see it as something that's kind of painful. But if we want to bring a theology into this sooner than we have before, like there's a reason Jesus talks so much about money. There's a
Mhm.
reason that, Eastern traditions are so concerned with materiality in as much as it changes you. Like, it's not just like you get more money and you're the same person with more money, but when you like truly love it, when you truly like define yourself by your materiality, by your materials, like you just start to shift. You see people as less human in a certain sense. So,
Yeah. Well, in a way, I would assume it's because you are becoming less human, right? Or less of who you're supposed to be. When we kind of saw that with Matango, where when they were focused on themselves, that selfishness, that's what caused them to go down that route. So, but what's interesting though, and I don't remember, I wish I would have wrote this in my notes, but the character that is doing all of the landscaping, he's doing some kind of construction, right? So of course his concern is about being painted in a positive light, but he's kind of the other side of this coin where they're in the end, well, in the end, in the middle, where the last time we see him, they're trying to test the radiation because they found like, wait, this thing, which I don't think it's ever explained what that blue piece of material is. Like it's radioactive. I'm assuming it has something to do with Mothra, like part of the egg, but they never say what it is. So they go back there and they're testing for the radiation. He shows up. He's like, what are you guys doing here? And hey, we're testing for radiation. Like, his concern isn't that, wait a minute, we just did all of this construction. There's radiation here. Like, he's not stopping to think about what that would do to people. He's just like, no, I want to keep going. Right. And like, how often do we see that though? Where I guess now maybe it's a little bit more commonplace, but like with asbestos, excuse me, and with like lead paint, right? I mean, that's something that we're now dealing with, but years prior, it was like, it's an issue. And people knew it was an issue, but they just kept going.
Yeah.
So that reminded me of that, or the dollar in that sense is, well, how can we cut corners? We're going to exploit people in a way and affect their health. Like, how huge is that?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you bring in asbestos, and I have experience with almost moving into a building, and they're like, oh, well, just don't kick the ceiling because there's asbestos. And it's like, well, I don't in healthy buildings kick the ceiling, but if you have to tell me what to do to avoid it, I should just not live here. But I think it's interesting because within the context of the movies, like, I knew asbestos was bad, but I didn't know why it was bad. In the Godzilla franchise, we have many stories tall examples of why radioactivity is bad. So it's even more glaring here that they can overlook it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of where I was at too. I'm right. And like, you guys aren't that far removed from what happened. But isn't that it though? Where, I mean, we're now dealing with people who deny that the Showa ever happened. And I'm like, really? You see all these images of concentration camps and you're just going to pretend like that didn't matter. So I think, unfortunately, we can say how these things are important, but if it's convenient for us to forget, we will.
Yep.
But, yeah, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot. I feel like, I feel like the other element of the exploitation is a little bit bigger to dive into, but did anyone else have any thoughts about that before we move on? Everyone's shaking their head no, so we're going to go with no. All right.
Yeah, I love how we're shaking our heads on a podcast. We really got the medium down.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem is we've got the video chat, right? So we're just assuming like, oh, wait. But no, I think the exploitation here is really big, and that plays into this next part. And that's kind of why I was like, hey, segue. So what I love is with Kalat, he brings back the significance of the 1961 film, right? So that's what we've talked about before, where are these films really connected? Some are, some aren't. They didn't really have these grand plans of Toho cinematic universe the way that they're planning on doing now, which will be interesting to see how that plays out. But in the first film, the Shobijin are captured, right? I mean, that's big part of the film. But I think the thing that we didn't necessarily touch on as much, and maybe I'm forgetting, is the Relisican government allowed it to happen.
Yeah.
Right. So that's something to keep in mind, where the Shobijin are coming back. So when they come back and we see the apprehension that the infant island natives have, it makes sense because they've already gone through this before, right? For them to come back is a huge deal. So not only have they had that moment happen, because that's what one of the chief says, right? We trusted you guys once and you betrayed us. But I mean, they got bombs dropped on them. Like, why would they have any positive view of the outside world? So, it's this idea, like, Honda is trying to throw, or Honda and Sekizawa are trying to throw that shame back into the forefront of the film is, well, you didn't help us then, and you didn't help us now with getting the egg back. So now you're coming to our island and asking us for help. Like, who do you think you are?
Yeah. Kind of attacks that superpower, like, pride that we can have. It's a nice reversion from what we normally expect, where they would just be, oh yeah, sure, we'll help. It's kind of nice. There's a little human tension in there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so in terms of like being a direct sequel, though, this one this is not really a huge point. This is one that I thought was interesting personally. In a lot of modern movies, if I went to go see, movie 2, movie 3, or movie 2020, the reboot from 40 years ago, like
Mm-hmm.
it would hold my hand through the whole thing. It would be like, oh, it's okay, you haven't seen the first one. It's okay, you haven't seen number 2. We're here for you. This is the only one you have to see. This one, I very much felt like I would have been lost had I not seen a couple of the background ones. And I just thought that was interesting how it was made back in the 60s. Was it like, oh, you haven't seen my previous movies? Well, you're in for a rough couple hours.
Yeah. Well, and that's where it's like you have the part where they're in the forest, right? And already there's the comment of, oh, it's Mothra's egg. And they're like, Mothra? Like, do you believe that? Like, there's already that understanding that who it would be.
Right.
Right. There is no, oh, tell us who Mothra is. And now we get this 5-minute exposition of what had happened in a previous film.
Mm-hmm. Well, the name is already Mothra, so you've kind of built in.
Yeah. But the guys from Monsters vs. Men brought up a really good point about this film, is that this film definitely feels more like a Mothra film than what we've had with Godzilla previously. And I think even with King Kong vs. Godzilla, right, it's a different kind of film. So it's almost like with these past two films, they've been exploring what it means to be a Godzilla film. Because obviously before that, all we had was Gojira and then Godzilla Raids Again. So it's kind of been growing pains to a certain degree. But there's a lot of obviously carryover from the previous film that if you've never watched it before, I don't think you would pick up on the nuances this time around.
And that's a good point. This is like the last Kaiju. It kind of the way Last Jedi looks at, why do we like Star Wars? What's the core of Star Wars, and how can we play within its sandbox but shift it a little bit? I think this is a cool exploration of what is it? What's a Godzilla film? What's a Kaiju film? Why do we use these set pieces compared to regular sized animals? Why do they have to be Kaiju instead of like lions? I think that's a really good point. Maybe I'll listen to their podcast now.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. They're pretty short episodes too. But Ben, I mean, so growing up, you said this wasn't one of your favorites. You revisited it, in 2014. I mean, have you spent a lot of time with the 1961 film?
No, last time I watched it was roughly 2016.
Mm-hmm.
It was never really a go-to movie for myself,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, it was considered by not just the Japanese fans, but also us Western fans. It was a top tier movie produced by Toho.
Yeah, and I've kind of grown to the opinion that some of the best films in the franchise are the ones where there's just one monster, right? So you've got Gojira, Rodan, Mothra, Shin Godzilla. I mean, to me, those are 4 of the best films out of this entire series. So yeah, I didn't know how familiar you were with that, just because, like I said, I think having that point of reference adds a lot, but it's hard for me to say, oh, you don't have to watch it to appreciate it, because I can't just unwatch Mothra, so I have no idea. So I was kind of curious how you felt about that. But moving on, and this is kind of where I want to move, keep the conversation, circling around between the three of us, is, when we get to the scene where they go to the hotel and they discover the Shobijin, right? When they return, the Shobijin leave because they don't feel like the humans are making any headway into getting the egg back. It's not that the kindness isn't appreciated, right? And this is where I feel like the film really kicked my butt yesterday, is like, it's not that they didn't appreciate the kindness, but kindness isn't always enough when it comes to getting things done in injustice, right? So It's like, hey, we appreciate your help, but you didn't get this done.
Yeah.
And this is what's going to be the result of it, right? So, of course, they realize like we need to ask for help. Sakai isn't dense enough to recognize that asking, won't go far. Like he realizes like if we ask, they're not going to help us because we weren't able to help. But Professor Mira is really hoping that he's like, if we can appeal to them with just this really sincere, just asking them sincerely on behalf of everyone who's going to suffer because of Godzilla, maybe they'll help. But that's what's so interesting about this film is they get to the island and they still say no. Right? Like
Right.
they get there, hey, here's this red drink, don't get worse with the radioactivity, right? They're still willing to help. But they're still like, no, we're not going to help. Like, how would you guys feel if that was you, right? It's like, hey, Godzilla's about to like destroy everything I love and own. Like, wouldn't it be really easy to kind of just be like, why are you guys being selfish? Like, there's a part of me where I'm like, why would you guys not help? But I don't know. Like, it's like, how did you guys feel about that? I feel like I'm a teacher.
Yeah. Well, you got the teacher, you got the student who read the material, and you got the student who like, yeah. I think we have this. I think maybe what you're getting at, or at least what I was hearing in the question, is with the severity of Godzilla, that seems like it should override maybe what they deserve or what they expected. It'd be kind of like, well, frick, man, like I know I ran over your wife and your dog with a car twice, like, but can't you help me? I'm in a lot of trouble. Like if we would think that like something like Godzilla should override that. And I kind of am happy that it didn't, because then it gave them a lot of agency still. Because I think in a lot of times, like Godzilla could overwrite their agency and kind of rob them like a character moment. Because how do you say no to Godzilla? So to have them say no, I think it was a real kind of like, I thought it was such like a cool moment, even though I was kind of like, oh, well, geez, it's Godzilla, guys. Like, please.
Yeah. What about you, Ben?
That's what I was thinking. As far as my viewpoints when it comes to that whole scenario, they made their point clear. Okay, you couldn't help us. Why should we help you? What's in it for us if we do help you?
And it's like, hey, remember what you guys did to our island too, right?
Yeah.
Like we're in this position because of y'all. So the reason I ask, and if you're not done, Ben, I'll edit it out.
No, I'm done.
Okay. No, I want to make sure, because the reason I asked that, and there's a reason why I went with the teacher route, is because I was sitting here and thinking about like, okay, there's something here that I'm missing, and it hit me that we went and watched the Mothra film, right? And we viewed Mothra as a divine being, right? Where Mothra does as she pleases. The Shobijin, in a sense, are like they're prophetesses, right? So on the one hand, you have the chief who says Mothra won't help, right? It's the outside world's fault for playing with the devil's fire, the fire forbidden by the gods. And he says, like we have no faith in outsiders. We trusted them once and were repaid with treachery. So even though their apprehension is understandable, like I think we all would agree that like this is incredibly important to understand that like even if they directly are not responsible, there's still some agency and responsibility that they have to take on. Is it the chief's place or even the Shobijin's place to say what Mothra will or won't do? So, the Shobijin may trust the protagonist, but they still have their own experiences. So it's like, I understand where they're coming from, but you're talking about the agency of the humans. But what about Mothra? If we view Mothra as a divine being with divine agency and even with some kind of divine justice, here's kind of the thing is like, Junko, I think in this film, and I will bring up the point that you want me to do, Chris. Junko is the voice of reason in this film.
Mhm.
Like, I love the fact that with this film, you know, it's not this contemporary film where you just get beat in the head with like, hey, misogyny is bad, misogyny is bad. No, it's like you have Sakai who continually tells Junko what she's doing is wrong, only for it to be in the climax of the film, she's the one who's saying what needs to be said, and he gives her the space to speak because he realizes when he takes the time to listen, she's the only one saying anything of any sense, right? So in this moment, she says, no one deserves to die because of Godzilla, not even the bad ones. So the Islanders may see this as divine retribution. They see it as, well, this is, you reap what you sow. But in the Christian tradition, that is not what Jesus says. Jesus does away with reaping what you sow. It's rather you get what you get because of the grace of God. So in this moment, Mothra speaks, and it is this moment, this plea of grace and forgiveness that as soon as she's done speaking, Mothra speaks up. And I'm just like, I don't know, like it's incredible to me that, not saying that injustice needs to be ignored, but I think of my own, this contemporary situation that we have where I know we say we don't want to get political in the podcast and I don't want to create a debate, but when we see people suffering and we say, well, this is what the law says, or we say, you know, they did it to themselves, what does God say? Right? It's not about what we say or what we think or what we feel, because we can say that the laws are just, you know, don't break the laws, but God knows every single dang evangelical will pray, even if the law says that, you know, you can't pray, right? That's never going to happen in the United States, but laws are only as convenient until you disagree with them. You know, you need to get to the hospital, you're going to speed. So the point being, it's not our place to say who doesn't receive grace and forgiveness. It's whatever God, I guess, we say we worship, right? And so in this, it's just incredible to see that Mothra just gets that moment of agency. And like, nope, you, my followers, don't understand what I will or won't do. And I sat there last night and I'm like, all right, well, Honda's preaching tonight.
Well, and to go off that a little too, Mothra had that agency in the last film when to go rescue them last time. So Mothra can save whoever Mothra wants to save, no matter what.
Yep.
But it was interesting that this is a response to the plea here. And again, not to get into some sort of gender essentialism, but the feminine is the feminine aspect is very strong in this movie, where you're right, it doesn't beat us over the head with like misogyny is bad. Obviously it is. Like, that's not the discussion. This discussion is like, how is it presented? And in this one, we have it, the Shobijin are the ones who say your kindness can only go so far. We really kind of need results. It's her speaking up that gets Mothra prompts to go. Like, when they have a chance to speak, it puts other characters in the place, and I really love that.
Yeah. So this is where I'm like, these films wouldn't have anything to say if it wasn't for the humans, right? You know, and that's, to me, this is why I love this film. I mean, I did before, but when that kind of all clicked in, you know, it's this idea that not only is Mothra going to, you know, extend this forgiveness and save humanity, but she's going to give up her own life to do it, you know, and that right there, and you look at the end of it, is this world that our protagonists want to make. It only happens when we trust one another, right? And that's really what I took away from it, is especially in our political climate right now, we are so worried about, we want to ostracize and make people the other based on their political ideologies. And to a certain degree, I understand there has to be some kind of safety, especially when people do promote subjugation on the one hand, or when you have people promote such radical lack of forgiveness. Like, it's almost to the point where it's like, I agree with you on 90% of things, but you are so unwilling to love and forgive people that I can't be around you because of that. right? So there's two ends of the, and there's multiple ends to this whole conversation, but that's what Honda and Sekizawa are saying here, is that if the world is going to progress, we have to learn to trust one another. We have to learn how to, I think, like Bonhoeffer says, we have to, judge people less on what they do or don't do and in light of what they suffer. Right. So that's what these natives had to do, is they looked at the outside world and they're like, they couldn't justify it. But once Mothra put things into perspective, they realized, like, okay, well, these innocent people don't deserve to die.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we should do something. And let's be honest, if they didn't do something, Godzilla would destroy Japan, and then Godzilla would probably destroy Infant Island too, right? If they didn't do anything, I mean, Godzilla would have destroyed the egg. Mothra would have died. Like, that could have potentially ended the cycle. I thought about that too. I'm like, what would have happened if they didn't step in?
One of the things I'd like to add to that, if I can get this little piece in,
Go for it.
when it comes to Mothra's sacrifice, now this is just my perspective and the way I look at it. That to me was basically like Jesus giving up his life.
Mm-hmm.
Although he takes on the devil, in the end, the devil may have won that fight. He did not win the war. With Mothra's twin caterpillars being reborn, that's basically the new life.
Yeah.
From rising from the tomb.
And I think obviously Honda not being a Christian, even though Subaraya was, you could probably view it as like, the idea of reincarnation and all these things, but that whole prevalence of giving up one's life and recognizing that death is not the ultimate victor, right? So with our belief in Christianity, we believe that death, you're right, this battle may have lost, but the overall war has been won through that self-sacrifice, through that compassion, through that act of saving another.
Well, and if I may, like the Infant Island, you could, I don't want to be too dogmatic about it, but there's a Peter-esque moment there when Peter's like, no, Jesus, don't die. Like, you have a different sort. Our control over the deity, our interaction with God looks different, and that's you being with us. That's you being on our side. And then Jesus says, no, I have something else that I have to do. I have to do this a different way. And essentially Mothra is in that same boat. But what Peter learns and what Infant Island eventually learns is, like, having them die is the best thing to happen, because not only does it save them, but it saves everyone else. Godzilla might eventually wreck all of humanity. So it's that self-sacrificial death that helps not only them, but everybody. But you get something better back. It's not just like Mothra's dead now forever. It's not like Jesus stays there forever. But both find new life in their own different ways. It's just having let go of our control over, our talismanic control over the deity, to say that it's good that they have their own minds. It's good that I don't have control in this iron grip over what they can and cannot do.
So to kind of wrap this up, because we still have to do viewer questions too. This will probably be one of our longest episodes. Yes, Chris. Semantics. So I did think it was really interesting. Just minor point. First of all, every time that Jun Tazaki's character came on, my son's like, that guy's really cranky. These little comments he makes me laugh. So it's interesting that with the Japanese, self-defense forces, like, they were so close to defeating Godzilla. And then they had to push the generators past capacity, right? I'm like, first of all, thanks for not doing that, because now we got all these other movies, but like, you guys could have really saved the day and we could have avoided all this, but that's what you get. Just kind of Honda's way of reminding us that the military is not as capable as they think they are. Watching a bunch of Ultra Q lately, it's mind-blowing how much better, like with the effects, with the egg cracking, how much better it was in this film compared to Ultra Q. Because in Ultra Q, what they would have done is have like a painting pop up with all the cracks, right? And it
Mhm.
wouldn't be nearly as good in this one. I'm like, oh, that's actually, I've been watching so much of that to the point that my wife's like, I'm tired of Ultra Q.
That poor woman. She
So
wants to watch something in English for once.
yeah, no, she wants to finish The Irishman, and I told her we will. I just haven't been in the mood.
Got a headache?
And then last thing, so Miki Yashiro, we last saw her in Matango. So she was the school teacher in this film, but in Matango, she was the student. So
Well,
someone got a nice promotion.
the student has become the master now.
Yeah. And yeah, the whole thing about Mothra, when the caterpillars spray the silk, it's a different pitch. I don't know. I just love that. It was a nice little touch. I've noticed it before, but I always enjoy it. What about you guys? Anything that stood out? Just kind of that doesn't really fit into the conversation.
Well, maybe just sponsored by your thought. And I've talked about this a little before, but as I've been watching a little Super Sentai Ranger, which is the one that became Mighty Morphin Power Rangers over here, like the difference between 64 people in costumes and 92 people in costumes isn't a huge gap. And I thought that was just, I don't have a big point about that either. I just thought that was kind of funny. That's all of my
You just hit the
additional.
microphone.
I dropped my phone on the bottom of the desk. That's all my commentary. So, Ben, if you've got any more, please save me.
I actually have none to give out.
Well, I'm sure you'll have some thoughts here. So we've got 4 questions. The first comes from Instagram land, from the Kaiju archives. The guys over there, I think it's 2 guys, maybe it's just 1. They did the Toho cut of King of the Monsters. So they went through the new film and they replaced the music with older music. They replaced the roars with the classic roars. They edited out the gonorrhea joke.
What?
So yeah, I would definitely suggest talk to them before they take that down. But their question is, what do you think makes Mothra vs. Godzilla smarter than most kaiju films, and how it's more than just another versus creature feature? I've already kind of talked my share on this episode. So Ben and Chris, what do you guys think?
Chris, have at it.
Okay. Yeah, I think just the universality of the conversation changes it a bit. I think the part of it, I think, I haven't seen enough kaiju movies to know if this is true, but I loved having so many different factions. That's not the right word, but there's so many different groups with their own interests in this movie, where it's not just like in other movies where it's like antagonists, protagonists. If you're a good guy, you all agree. If you're a bad guy, you all agree. But there's so many different layers to how many different groups and how many different interests are represented in the movie, where it doesn't feel like any one is totally right. Doesn't feel like any one is exactly the one to root for. They can all learn from each other. They can all challenge each other. So I think that was a really much appreciated dynamic shift there.
Well, Chris kind of just stole my answer.
Well, you should have talked first.
Well,
That's what you get for being kind.
No, so yeah, I think you're right. It's that universality where some of these films we're going to find are definitely more confined to that time period, I think, with the messaging, whereas this one is definitely something that there's a lot that can be said for sure. So Nathan Marchand, he, as mentioned before, Monster Island Film Vault. So it's a comment and question. So he says, I discovered this film back in the video rental store days, back when a Godzillasaurus could still be found in the wild, Spoiler warning, Chris, that joke will one day make sense.
Oh, great.
When it was sold under the title Godzilla vs. Mothra. I have no idea why the names were reversed, especially since it was released stateside as Godzilla vs. The Thing, and the Marvel Comics character is nowhere to be found. I'm almost sure this was the first time I even knew the Shobijin ever existed, but I went with it. It wasn't high on my list of G films for at first, but I've grown to love it. It doesn't break any new ground, but what it does, it does well. It's no wonder it's become, in many ways, the definitive Godzilla film. And I think that's a really good way to explain it. Maybe not the best Godzilla film, but like I would say, like the definitive film. I would go with that. Everything just comes together. Honda's direction, Sekizawa's script, the acting, Tsuburaya's special effects. Also, I never thought in my life I would be able to look at a name like Tsuburaya and being able to pronounce that without thinking about it. God, what is my life? So it's wonderful. Not my life, his comment here. As great as Mothra 1961 is, I think the Shobijin are better here because they feel more like characters and aren't the MacGuffin of the film. Plus, the Peanuts are still the best incarnation of the fairies. So question for you guys. What Christological parallels do you see in Mothra in this film? I think Tsuburaya actually develops them a bit more from Mothra 1961. Thoughts? Godspeed, gentlemen. Yeah, I wasn't going to spoil it, but we already covered that.
Yeah.
So, but his comment was awesome, so I wasn't not going to read it. But yeah, Nathan, you obviously know we were going to cover that, and we did. So, so next two questions come from Twitter. First, and I'm super thankful. We've had so much activity and replies and conversations on Twitter recently. I think that's partially because work's been slow, so I've been on there more than normal. But y'all have been great, so please keep it up. But Joshua Strip Matter asked, "What is your favorite Godzilla moment in this movie?" And Ben, you are going first.
My favorite moment with Godzilla. Probably the fact when he's swimming to the island where the school children are trapped. A lot of people don't realize this, but that's not the 64 suit. That is actually the 62 King Goji suit.
Huh. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Huh.
And the fun fact of it is, too, it's not just that one particular shot that we actually seen the King Goji suit used again, but when Godzilla is wrapped up in the silk and goes tumbling off into the ocean, that was the last that we saw of the 62 suit.
May it rest in peace.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about you, Chris? And I will say, for some reason, Squadcast did not change our plan to unlimited, so apparently we have 5 recording minutes left for this month. So we're gonna have to wrap this up.
Yeah, so we can save it for our next short episode. I think, does it count if I say the tail thing again? Because now I know it was just a dude in a prop, but that was cool. I thought that looked pretty cool, but now I know it wasn't all of Godzilla, it's just his tail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think that makes it cooler. So
I'll agree with that. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to the last question because now apparently it's 2 minutes.
Oh.
Since a good chunk of the plot, this is from William of Space Tree Studios, by the way. So since a good chunk of the plot revolves around Mothra's egg, it has to be asked, scrambled, poached, or sunny side?
Oh.
Neither. Go boiled.
Yeah, hard boiled. I think they even make that joke, right?
All right. I'm eating my egg.
I'm going to go with the off-world Jawas from Mandalorian. You just chop the top off and just stick your hand in the yolk.
What do they say? Like, Shuba! I don't remember what it was. Suka, that was it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, we're going to have to end kind of awkwardly here. Ben, thank you for joining us. Really,
thank you.
It was
you for having me.
that you were... Oh, man. Oh, okay. So we have 10-minute grace period. Awesome. Yeah. But let's just go ahead and end anyway.
Yeah.
Seriously, thank you so much for joining. You were just... It's been awesome to get to know you. I don't know. It's probably been the past 6 months or so. I'm very excited to... just keep having you involved in this process, however that may look. Definitely make sure to keep an eye out for the interviews that he's doing. I know who he's interviewing. I even kind of helped get one going unknowingly, which was really cool. But as you do those, we will definitely make sure to share them on the profile to get you some traction there. Do you know when your first one's going to be going up?
Well, I had promised one would go up this week, but since I have to go back and verify the Japanese, it could be sometime next week.
Okay.
Cool.
So probably by the time this episode comes out, it could be up. So just definitely keep an eye out on our Twitter pages. Apart from that, I think the only thing wanted to share is we are doing another giveaway. Just really simple. Someone donated their download code for the Ultraman series. So first person to @ us on Twitter or direct message us on Instagram. Or if you don't have either of those, just email me at contact@thekaijuapostle.com. I will view the timestamps. The first person to do that will get the download code. Does anyone have any thoughts before we say goodbye?
No, just remember to keep up with, Instagram. We'll be sharing stuff. We'll be sharing like Patreon stuff with. We got our first show notes sent out already, right, from last week's episode.
Yeah, I've actually got all the show notes, at least on my end. All the notes are there for everyone to view.
Yeah.
So
it's a good reason to sign up. You can read David's notes that didn't make it in. You can read all 3 or 4 of mine that definitely make it in, that I stretch further than they may have the ability to go.
Yeah. And I think we talked about that last time. We retweaked the tiers to 1, 3, and 5. And we are discussing doing a once a month bonus, like maybe 20 to 30 minutes bonus video / episode where we go into films that aren't necessarily kaiju films, or maybe ones that just didn't fit into our schedule, like Dogora. We're probably going to do like Space Amoeba. So haven't really decided how solid of an idea that is. We are toying that out. But if we do decide to do that, we will inform everyone online.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks again for tuning in, and have a great day. Thank you again for listening to this episode of the Kaiju Apostle Podcast. If you liked what you heard, don't be a stranger. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Kaiju Apostle Pod. To make sure you don't miss any future episodes, you can subscribe to our show on your favorite podcasting platform, including Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google. Lastly, we do have a Patreon page where we have some great perks, including early access to the episodes, show notes, and the ability to have your voice recordings featured on the show. Again, we appreciate the support, and we look forward to hearing from you.